Hey everybody, and welcome once again to Nose in the Book, a Bible reading commentary with me, your host, Pastor Justin Van Reed. Great to have you with me once again for another day to discuss these readings from God's Word. Today we have Exodus chapter 20, Job 38, Luke 23, and 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And once again, if there's something from these chapters that you would like me to discuss or that you have a question about, please feel free to post that question in the comment section below. Otherwise, let's take a look at what we've got here. First of all, back in Exodus, remember that the Israelites now have left Egypt, they've crossed the Red Sea, they've entered the wilderness, and they've made it all the way to Mount Sinai. And the Lord has appeared on the mountain, has called Moses up to speak to him. And now as we get into chapter 20, the Lord gives the first words to Moses, and we know them as the 10 Commandments or 10 words. And he starts off here with a statement about himself. A lot of times people see these commandments as breaking down basically between the Lord giving 5 things about his relationship with people, which would be the first 5 here, and then the last few being about relationships with one another. So honor your father and mother. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house or their stuff. And so there's different ways actually of, if you're wondering what are the 10 Commandments, there's actually different ways that they're broken down depending on your background and tradition. The Jewish people and have a different division here than than other Christian denominations, depending on if you take "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt" as a command in itself, or "you must not have any other God before me or but me" as the first command, and then whether you take coveting your neighbor's house and your neighbor's wife and stuff as one command or as 2 separate commands. So there's different ways of dividing it out. But again, the first half generally about relationship between people and God. Right, the Sabbath command, the idol commands, the not having any other gods, not using the Lord's name, and then the last 5 or 6 there about relationships with one another. So it all kind of comes down to this loving God and loving others. This is going to be the summary of the law, and here in the 10 Commandments you already see that. And these isn't the entire law, right? These aren't all the commands. It's just the beginning of it. As you get into chapter 21 and following, we're going to see a lot more. But certainly, this is a summary here of the, you might say, kind of like 10 of the main big words here from the Lord before you get into more of the details of how this plays out. What does it look like in the specifics, day to day and case by case, to live out these things? All right, moving on to Job chapter 38, and finally Elihu is done speaking, and now God shows up. And the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, it says, chapter 38, verse 1. And basically, over these next several chapters, God is going to question Job on a number of different areas. Here in chapter 38, the focus is on the natural world. And the natural world is actually not very natural. It's actually supernatural when you consider what he says here about the fact that God is the one who is really orchestrating so much of what goes on in the natural world. For example, he gives him, questions about creation, right? Were you there, Job? How does that work? Where did that stuff come from? He gives him questions about the weather, right? He talks about have you explored the springs from which the seas come? Where does light come from, right? All these creation things. And then he says, have you visited the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of hail? Who created a channel for the torrents of rain? Who makes the rain fall on the barren land? Who sends rain to satisfy parched ground? Does the rain have a father? And he just goes on here, and the focus, as I said, is on all of these things that are pretty incredible when you think about them and consider them. Things that you could observe just in the natural world. Just go outside and look around, and try and think who makes that happen? Where does that come from? Even the best meteorologists can't get it right. Who even decides why it's going to rain, when it's going to rain? Even if we could observe when it's going to rain, who decides why and when it's going to be a drought, when it's not going to be a drought? And so all of this is in the Lord's hands here is his point. Of course, all of creation called forth by God out of nothing by the word of his mouth. And so, this is the first series of questions to Job. Job, can you explain these things? And, what God is doing here in these last few chapters of the book of Job is not answering Job's complaint. He's not giving Job that trial, if you will. He's not going to come down and say, okay, Job, let me explain to you why things are the way they are. Rather, he just says to Job, I'll tell you what, you basically, it's kind of like what Jesus does with the Pharisees. I'll answer your question if you answer mine. Can you explain this? Can you explain this? Can you explain this? And of course, Job has no answer. All right, moving on to the New Testament, Luke chapter 23, and a very big and serious chapter here. Includes the crucifixion of Jesus once again. We've now seen it in Matthew and Mark, and now here in Luke 23. This chapter begins with Jesus' trial before Pilate, and then Pilate kind of passes him around here to Herod. And but ultimately, the mob calls for the crucifixion of Jesus, and so Pilate hands him over. And one of the things, I just want to point out a couple of unique things here to the Gospel of Luke. One is this statement of Jesus on his way to being crucified, where once again he gives one final warning of what is coming to the Jewish people and upon Jerusalem, where he says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children, for the days are coming when they will say, fortunate indeed are the women who are childless." And people, he says, will beg the mountains fall on us, plead for the hills to bury us. For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? And he's saying that a bad time is coming upon Jerusalem. All right, then after this, another thing unique to the Gospel of Luke, we have the interaction between Jesus and some of these other robbers, these other criminals on the crosses. And in the other Gospels, they're mentioned that they are attacking Jesus as well and kind of scoffing at him. But here you have this one criminal who says, who responds to the other criminal, "Don't you fear God? We are under the same sentence to die. We deserve to die for our crimes. This man has done nothing wrong." And Jesus here says, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." That's unique to the Gospel of Luke. And then after this, another statement of Jesus, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And then Jesus dies, and the record of his burial is here as well. So very, very significant chapter. This is what it's all about. You got this whole book. There's all of this Bible. And what does it all come down to? It comes down to the Lord Jesus giving his life. This is where God from the beginning had promised with the serpent and the seed. And here he is crushing the serpent, crushing sin and death and separation from God by giving his own life on the cross. This is the pivotal moment, you could say, in all of human history. All right, then last year, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And in chapter 8 and chapter 9, these two chapters, Paul talks about giving. Here in chapter 8, his focus is on the generous giving of the Macedonian churches. Churches in Philippi, for example. He says here that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. They did of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. And so Paul's really challenging the Corinthians, before you had the good attitude about giving, and, more and more, keep that up, keep that going. He gives this example here of the Macedonians, and what a picture, right? To be so generous that they are begging to give. It reminds me of so much of what Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Luke that we were looking at over these last few weeks about how the danger of money and how to store up treasure in heaven. And here Paul gives them an opportunity. Now, the context for this is that he was heading to Jerusalem, and he was going church by church, and he was raising a gift to help the people out there in the church in Jerusalem. And so he's calling the Corinthians here to take part in that gift. Some of the other churches have as well, and now he's calling for them as well. All right, then the last thing here is he mentions Titus several times here coming with him. Again, Paul had these companions that he needed, that he trusted, that were side by side with him. Here it's important for Titus to go with him. It really shows the integrity here of Paul, so that there was nothing, no funny business around this collection. You'll be carrying a lot of money, And so he says, we are traveling together to guard against any criticism for the way we are handling this generous gift. Just a wise, practical thing here of Paul never going alone, but saying it's wise to have someone alongside here. It keeps away from false accusation. It's a protection here. And so it's important for Paul to have a companion like Titus. All right, again, that's all we have time for now. But again, we had Exodus chapter 20 and the Ten Commandments. We had Job 38 with God showing up to begin his speech and challenge Job. We had Luke 23, the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. And we had 2 Corinthians 8 and a call to generous giving. Hope you again enjoyed your time in the Lord's Word today. Until next time, keep your eyes on the Lord and your nose in the book. See you again soon.